Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about how everything just got a whole lot worse with the car market. Before getting into this video though, as always, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. And if you want to see more videos like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post content every single day. Let's get into it. In a recent video, I talked about the recent rapid decline of the car market, and I suppose that I was a little bit too bullish in that video, as the stock people saying not bearish enough, because the car market has declined at an even more rapid rate just over the course of the last week. And so we're going to dive into that in today's video. So first off, I just want to throw out some numbers to kind of give you guys some perspective. So at the beginning of this year, a lot of people were forecasting that 2022 was going to be a great year for car sales in terms of volume and in terms of profitability. A lot of places were forecasting we were going to sell probably 16 million new cars this year. And as the year progressed, people realized that they forecast a little bit too high, because now the forecast is between 13.5 and 13.7 million new cars sold in the US for the 2022 sales year, which is substantially less than last year in the 2021 sales year, where we sold around 15 million new cars. And if you guys are wondering, 2020 was a little bit less than 15 million new cars. And so this is basically shaping up to be one of the worst new car sales years in like a decade, which, yeah, we've been hearing that a lot. Like, this is the worst in a decade, or the worst in the last few decades. That basically sums up 2022 at this point. And so we've got to dig into exactly why this is happening. So first off, we got to talk about a recent event, Hurricane Ian, and this actually might help out the car market slightly, believe it or not. It is causing a lot of negativity in the market in general, so it's kind of like, in the short term, pulled some people away from purchasing, because they're like, okay, we got to see what's happening with this, catastrophe over there before we, make any sort of financial decisions. And, fair enough, that's very responsible. But on the other side of things, a lot of cars got totaled out in that hurricane. And so there is going to be a lot of people in the very near future that need a vehicle. We don't know the exact numbers at this point. And, insurance companies are pretty notorious in terms of making things really difficult and take forever to basically get a claim out. And so I imagine we won't see the effects of this hurricane on the market until maybe like 3 to 6 to maybe 12 months from now. But this will ultimately affect the entire market, because enough cars, it looks on the surface, it looks like enough cars got totaled out. Now, moving from that, another topic of the last video was interest rates. And yes, interest rates have increased by a massive amount. Just to give you guys some perspective on this, at the beginning of the year, it was pretty easy to get an interest rate in the 2 to 3% range if you had great credit. Now it's difficult to get an interest rate under 7%, even if you have really good credit. And so you can imagine the average American that has okay credit is now getting quoted interest rates in the 9 to 12% range, as opposed to 3 or 4% at the beginning of the year. Again, if they just had okay credit, that is a huge increase. I mean, it depends on how expensive the car is, but like if you look at like a $50,000 car, I mean, that increase is going to increase your monthly payment by like $100 to $150 a month, depending on your loan term and all that kind of stuff. Again, there's a lot that goes into it, right? Down payment, trade-in, whether you have positive equity, negative equity, all that. Again, there's a lot that goes into a car deal, but on average, this is just basically going to increase people's car payments by a huge margin. And this is putting a lot of downward pressure on lower income brackets that are looking to purchase vehicles. And I've actually been seeing this like happen real time, because as I go to film cars at different dealerships, I've noticed that the less expensive vehicles are starting to slowly pile up at dealerships, because the demographic that typically purchases these less expensive vehicles can't afford the car payments on these. And so now they're just starting to, again, pile up at dealerships. I mean, a really good example is I was at the Toyota dealership today, and they had a bunch of 4Runners, and guess what they were? They're all SR5s. There was no Limiteds, there was no TRD Off-Roads, there's no TRD Pros, just SR5s, right? The entry-level 4Runner. And again, that has its own individual market, but like the point that I'm trying to make here is, again, these base models are starting to sit because the people that want them can't afford them. And so this is actually going to cause a pretty interesting effect in the car market, because on the other side of things, the more expensive vehicles, the luxury vehicles, are still selling at pretty crazy volume amounts, and automakers are taking note. And so a lot of automakers are actually focusing on producing their more high-end product rather than their lower-end product at this point, because they know that people that have higher income amounts, that it may be cash buyers or just have better credit in general, because again, higher income is associated with better credit. Again, just because you make a lot of money doesn't mean your credit's going to be great, but on average, if you make more money, then you tend to have better credit. And so these people in these higher income brackets are able to still get okay interest rates, or they're able to pay cash for cars, and so they're still buying. And so what I see happening over the next 3 to 6 to maybe even 12 months in the car market is a lot of these luxury car dealers are going to be sitting pretty. They're still going to be selling cars, maybe not as many as they were selling before, but they're still going to be selling cars. Whereas the dealerships that focus on selling more affordable vehicles are going to be struggling, and they're going to have to be discounting cars like crazy, and they're basically going to be having to buy car deals. It's going to be pretty interesting. So I guess if you happen to have the cash to buy a less expensive car, then in the next bit, it's actually probably going to be a pretty good market to buy, a more affordable car because of everything that's been happening with that market. So just like what we had after COVID, we're going to have the same thing within the car market, except instead of being people's, recovery from COVID, it's going to be the car market's recovery, I suppose, where it's going to be a K-shaped recovery. So again, luxury dealers going up, and then non-luxury dealers going down in terms of sales numbers, and then also in terms of overall profitability. Now that we've gone over most of the information, not all of the information though for the situation, because it's always very complicated, let's talk about how you could use this to save yourself some money, or should you even use this to save yourself some money, aka should you sit on the sidelines or should you look into buying a car at this point? So I think for most people, if you do not need a car, then I would take a step back right now and just kind of wait to see what happens, because I do think that there is potential for a lot more pain in the car market, because again, we have more interest rate increases happening in the short term and in the long term. And on top of that, it looks like used car values are, again, continuing to go down, which will just affect things overall. So if you don't need a car, then probably take a step back for a second. But let's say that you're in a situation where you do need a car. Like I said earlier in the video, it looks like more affordable cars are becoming more readily available, because the typical person that would purchase that affordable car cannot afford them at this point. And if you guys are wondering what exactly is happening, if we take like our stereotypical buyer for a more affordable car, they're going into a dealership, finding out that the interest rate is astronomically high, and so they can't afford the payment just from an interest rate perspective. But then on top of that, a lot of people have negative equity now for the first time in like 2 years, because used car values have declined by a massive amount. And so this person's going in, finding out that their car is worth less money than their loan on it. Again, for the first time in like 2 years, the interest rate has tripled compared to what they had last time, or sometimes like even quadrupled. Like it's crazy, some of these interest rate increases that people are seeing. And so they're in this situation where, if they had bought the same exact car 2 years ago, they would have had like maybe a, $400 a month car payment, let's just say, for example, and now their car payment that they're getting quoted is $800 or $900 a month. Like it's such a massive increase that it just doesn't make sense for a lot of people. So if you happen to have a really good credit score and an equitable situation, or you have enough cash on hand to pay cash for one of these more affordable cars, you can wheel and deal, because again, there are options. Dealer inventory is starting to slowly increase. And so you can go into the dealership and say, hey, I'll take that off your hands for you. I know that you're sitting on it for a little bit, right? So just kind of understand that. That being said, the more expensive cars that, again, still have slightly more demand on them, because people that have money still have money to spend, do have some downward pressure on them. I've seen a lot of really special cars getting backed out of in terms of the people that initially ordered them, and it seems to be happening at a much more rapid rate. And the thing that I'm kind of seeing is a lot of people that are purchasing these cars, even though they have really high income, they're not paying cash for these cars. They're financing them just like everyone else. And they're having rates that are 2 to 3 times more expensive, just like everyone else. And so these more expensive cars are no longer affordable for them. And so there is a chance that you'll be able to wheel and deal on some of these more expensive items. However, I do think it's going to take a little bit longer for this to come around. My guess at this point is probably within the next 2 weeks to the next month. I think there's going to be a lot more wheeling and dealing. I mean, I'm starting to see some specialty products slowly stack up on dealership lots, but a lot of these cars still have really big markups on them because dealers still think that the market is what it was for the last 2 years. And so they think that they're still going to be able to get all the money for these cars, but they're slowly going to realize that the buyers aren't there anymore and they're going to have to come down on their prices. And then, well, if you happen to have cash on hand, it might be the perfect time to swoop in on, some of these rare cars, especially if they are cars that are going to be discontinued in the near future, which there seems to be a lot of that happening with all of the changes in this market. That's pretty much going to sum things up for today's video. I want you guys to let me know what you think about this whole situation and what your game plan is moving forward. And if you guys want to know what my personal game plan is moving forward, is I'm just sitting on the sidelines at this point, and I'm, talking to different dealers about different cars and just kind of putting feelers out there at this point, because there are a few cars that I have been interested in purchasing over the last few years that, well, frankly, I haven't been able to purchase because the prices have just been a little bit too high. Like I just see the product as overvalued. And so I'm kind of just saying, hey, if it happens to fall within this range, give me a call. That's what I'm doing at this point. But with that being said, I'll see ya.